half the battle truly is showing up. And you will find that there are a lot more folks who want to be encouraging and supportive than you might expect. And so my advice is to, even when you feel discouraged and like you're not being heard, continue to show up and continuing to make your voice heard, even if it seems like the people in the room don't want to hear it, because there are people, more people than you might think, that do want to hear your voice.
It's often said that young folks are the ones who will inherit the country, but despite that, politics are dominated by adults. Some of today's most pressing issues, from censorship and school curriculum to mental health and trans rights, directly impact teens, so it makes sense that they should have an input on their government and community. If a teen identifies a problem in the Arlington community, how can they get involved in the local government to address this issue? I'm Maddie Hawkins, and this is the Arlington AMP podcast. In my quest to answer this question, I was able to sit and chat with Graham Weinschenk. Graham grew up in Arlington and first got involved in the local government while at Yorktown High School, and has continued ever since. We talked about his experiences and advice for teens in Arlington who want to get involved today. These days, Graham works at the Arlington County Board office, where he's the aide to County Board member Matt DeFerranti. He takes a lot of pride in his work.
I think a lot of people don't necessarily see the direct and substantial impact that the county government has in their day-to-day lives, whether it's, receiving county benefits or living in county subsidized housing. There are, benefits and programs that the county has that really do change people's lives, and it's an incredibly fulfilling thing to be a part of.
So, what made you first want to get involved in politics?
I think my interest in government really comes from my family. My grandfather worked for the city of New York for a long time, for Mayor John Lindsay, and my grandmother worked for the Department of Social Services in New York State. And so I think public service is, a big part of my family identity.
In his freshman year of high school, Graham applied for an internship with a political action committee focused on national politics, and completed it in his sophomore year. Since then, he has worked in state and local government.
There are a lot of people who think that the, sort of national politics and the federal government are sort of the be-all, end-all of government, and that's really not the case. There are a lot of people it's a really big space with a lot of people, and their sort of recommendation was that it's easier to be, a big fish in a smaller sea, so to speak. And you also just have more direct impact the sort of lower you go, so to speak. And so you have there are a lot fewer people, and you have a lot more impact at the state level, and then that's even more true at the local level.
So after you finished your internship, what kind of things did you do to continue politics?
After I did the internship my sophomore year of high school, I kind of continued the political track, and I got more involved at sort of the state level in politics. But in doing that while I was in high school, it's when I really kind of identified a big issue that I care about, which is sex education reform. And so that's really when the shift policy for me started, was looking at Virginia's sex education around the Commonwealth and seeing just how atrocious it is in a lot of different areas, and really wanting to make an impact there. And so I got a lot more involved in sort of legislative and reform efforts from that point.
Were there any times during your internship or afterwards that you felt your voice wasn't heard, especially as a teen?
Oh, God, yes. In summary, yes. I remember very distinctly, actually, the working to do sex education reform. When I was a senior in high school, I had written a bill in the Virginia General Assembly to try and do some small reforms to Virginia's sex ed system, and the bill was put into the Senate Public Education subcommittee, and so they had a subcommittee hearing in Richmond, and they give 24 hours warning, sometimes less, and so I hopped on a train. I went down to Richmond to testify about my bill, and I had my AP government class back at Yorktown watching the hearing on the TV. And, I gave my testimony, and this passionate testimony about why sex education reform is so important. And this committee of, bipartisan lawmakers, Democrats and Republicans, basically gave me oh my gosh, you're in high school and you're doing all this. This is so great. You should be so proud, before every single one of them voted against it without actually engaging with the material. And so I think for a lot of high school students who try to do anything that's sort of seen as in an adult realm, it's a very familiar feeling, I'm sure. And it's really disappointing. But I also had a lot of adults who were very supportive and very encouraging. And so I think it's, my takeaway from that is, as frustrating as it is, it's in a way a lot more motivation to keep kind of pushing.
We started talking about specific ways in which teens in Arlington can get involved. Graham had a few recommendations based on his experiences. The
school board has what's called the SAB, Student Advisory Board. And so when I was a junior and senior in high school, I was on the county student advisory board as the vice chair for my senior year. And so they're, very close advisors to the school board. They go through the budget every year and make recommendations. I remember when I was a vice chair, we made recommendations related to staffing for school social workers and psychologists, and got funding increased for those positions. They study really, and you can, the SAB really picks and chooses sort of what they want to focus on a given year. And so it is a great opportunity to make a difference on something that you identify in your school system or in your school.
Graham also recommended the Teen Network Board, which is teen-led and works closely with the County Board and APS, as well as the APS Student Advisory Board.
The Teen Network Board only meets during the school year, and their work focuses on, they have 5 different committees that they operate through: communications, drugs and alcohol prevention, the Healthy Relationships Task Force, peer-to-peer, focusing on creating a better community through awareness and advocacy free of bullying, and then VICE, volunteering, internships, community service, and employment, which advocates for opportunities for good citizenship for teens.
So if a teen wants to join the Teen Network Board, how would they do that?
So they can go to the county website and search for the Teen Network Board, and member applications for 2023 through 2024 are now open. But more generally, I would say that it's important for teens to realize that they don't necessarily need a carved out space to show up. It's okay to be the youngest person in a room full of adults, and to show up and make your voice heard when you have an opinion about something. Your perspective is no less valid because you're a teenager. Of course, in the school system, I would actually argue that teens have the most valid perspective, since they are in the schools, right there with teachers. They're in the schools every single day. But your perspective about, parks or streets or trash are no less valid because you're a teenager. You have experiences as well. And you should feel entirely comfortable making your voice heard to your government.
One department in Arlington that Graham mentioned was the Arlington Addiction Recovery Initiative, which is working to help with the opioid crisis, an issue that has had a big impact on teens in Arlington in the past year. He also mentioned the Community Service Board, which works on youth mental health to ensure that all young people feel safe and supported. For those interested in sports and nature, Graham mentioned Parks and Rec. That department offers a ton of classes, internships, and other programs, and Graham said that they're always looking for teen input. And can teens get onto these councils?
I don't believe we have any regulations right now on age, and so my advice would be to apply. And my secondary advice on that would be to not worry about, as a teenager, to not worry about your resume and the contents of your resume when you're applying to really anything. And that passionate cover letter about your interest and your passion is going to go farther than having a substantial resume when you're in high school.
Could you tell me what's the most important thing you've learned from your experiences as a teen?
Make friends. As interested as anyone might be in policy or politics and doing that kind of work, that work is not possible from a literal sense of you're not able to accomplish things without friends, but it's also not going to be productive from a mental and emotional state. perspective unless you make friends. Your friends are your support system, and this work can be, while it is fulfilling, it can also be hard sometimes. There are folks who do experience, real hardship, real difficult hardship. And so it is important to make friends and to have people that you can go to both professionally and personally.
Is there any last advice you would like to give teens who want to get involved?
To stay true to yourself and do work that you're truly passionate about and that, doesn't feel like it's an obligation but a passion. And you can make a difference. You really can.
That was Graham Weinschenk, aide to the county board member Matt DeFerranti. There are tons of ways to make an impact if you're a high schooler here in Arlington. If you'd like to get involved with any of the opportunities Graham mentioned, we've dropped a bunch of links to those opportunities right here in the show notes for this episode. You can also find them in the article for this story on our website, arlingtonamp.org. Thank you so much for listening to the Arlington Amp podcast. I'm Maddie Hawkins, and this story was produced as part of Arlington Independent Media's Youth Journalism Initiative. You can learn more about that and join us by visiting www.arlingtonmedia.org.